Hey yo, what's happening? It's your boy J-BANDZ back up in the building again. We gonna do another video today, bro. You gonna watch some scary videos, and we gonna see if I get scared or not, cause I'm not gonna get scared of this bull.
Stop the cap! Stop the cap right now! Stop the cap!
God damn! Oh, what's going on, man? You already know who it is, so you don't need the intro. Sight! I lied! It's your boy J-BANDZ! Back with another video. You feel me? We gonna watch this scary video. It's extremely scary pizza delivery video. I ain't gonna lie. I don't know what to expect. Nah. Let's just get this over with.
Soundstripe.
I woke up one evening and looked outside my window. The fog was just settling in. It always gets foggy during the winters in our small town. I got freshened up and got ready for work. I worked the night shift at the local pizza center. As I got ready for my shift, my eyes fell upon an old family photo. It always brought a smile to my face. That photo was the last memory I had with my parents before they met with an accident and passed away last year. I got in my car and started driving to work. The fog was thick that night, and the smell of burning wood from the local farms around the town settled in the air. I liked it. It reminded me of the late-night drives my dad used to take me on when I was a kid. I reached work and met my friend Lizzie as I entered. "The fog has never been so thick," she said. It was a Thursday night, and I didn't expect a lot of deliveries on that night. As I sat waiting for the first order to come in, the local news caught my attention. It spoke of the disappearance of a young man named Elton. That took me by surprise. I knew Elton. He used to be my classmate in college. What could have happened to him, I wondered. This was the second missing person case that had sprung from our town this month. "What's wrong?" Lizzie asked as she saw my face watching the news. I knew him. "Elton and I were best friends in college," I replied to her. "Well, I hope they find him," Lizzie said. "Anyway, the first set of deliveries are ready." I picked up the pizzas and started making my way out. "Be careful. The visibility tonight is low," my manager said to me as I walked out the door. I strapped the pizzas to the front seat of the car. I had 2 deliveries to make, and sadly, they were both in complete opposite directions. I sat in the car and looked at the 2 addresses I had to deliver to. The first one I knew, but the second one, I had never been there before. In fact, I never even knew that people lived at that location. "That's strange," I mumbled to myself. I'd grown up in this town and had been living there for 21 years now, and not once have I ever heard of or ever been to a house in that location. That part of town was supposed to be abandoned as far as I could remember. Moreover, the address seemed incomplete. I figured I'd just have to get there and then find the place. I didn't overthink it and started driving. After all, I cannot afford to be late. Pizzas need to be delivered hot. With no time, I reached the first location and delivered the first pizza. The old lady who ordered gave me a nice tip. I got back in my car and started heading towards the second location. As I drove down the cold, misty night, a sense of anxiety kicked in. Like, as if I knew something was not right. Something was off. I couldn't figure out what it was. Just a bad feeling. This second location was on the outskirts of our town. As I reached closer, the roads got more and more narrow and rough. After a certain point, there were no streetlights, too. I had to completely rely on the headlights of my rusty old wagon. As I drove through the darkness, the car suddenly started to vibrate until the point where it stalled. I knew I should have changed the battery this week, I thought to myself. My car had stopped, and I was in the middle of nowhere. I kept playing around with the battery until it finally started, and boy, was I relieved. I'm not one to get scared easily, but if I'm being honest with myself, it was indeed an eerie night. After driving for a while, I finally saw the house in the distance. It was an old, abandoned mansion, or at least, it looked abandoned. Who could possibly live there? I said to myself. I reached the front of the house, picked up the pizzas, and got out. By this point in time of night, the fog was so thick I had to use my phone's flashlight, just to watch my steps. There was not much light around. The whole house was covered in darkness, with the exception of a dim yellow light coming out of a single window. I could hear wild dogs howling in the distance. I approached the front door of this huge, dull mansion and rang the bell. Turns out, the bell never rang. It was not in working condition. So I knocked. I heard the sound of wood creaking, along with heavy footsteps approaching the door. As the door opened, I saw a big middle-aged man in front of me. He was pretty well built and had a long beard. His face was covered with small scars. They looked as if he had been scratched. He had a blank look on his face and just stared at me without saying a word. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I cleared my throat and said, "Your pizza, sir?"
"Ah, yes. Food,"
he replied in a heavy, dull voice. I handed him the pizza and he took it and walked back in, leaving the door open. As he walked in, he threw the pizza box across the table and said,
"Wait here."
I remember thinking to myself, who would just throw a delicious pizza on the table like that? The action was pretty rugged, like as if he never really wanted the pizza. He walked deeper into the house to get the money for the bill, I assumed. With every step he took, the wooden floor creaked. He walked deeper into the house until I couldn't see him anymore, but I could still hear the sound of his footsteps, and the wooden floor creaking with every step. And then it stopped. There was nothing but absolute silence. I stood at the door waiting. The inside of the mansion was worn out. A few minutes passed, and I had not seen or heard anything yet. What's taking him so long? I said out loud. I felt a hard hit on my head from the back, and I just fell into darkness. The next thing I remember is opening my eyes. I was on the grounds, inside the mansion. It didn't take me long to realize I'd been knocked out unconscious. Someone knocked me out from behind, I thought. What's happening? I was confused and could still feel pain on the back of my head. As I tried to reach my hand to the back of my head, I realized I was tied down. My hands were tied behind my back and my legs were tied together. "What the hell?" I whispered. The dim yellow light covered the room. I looked around and saw the pizza on the table. It had not been opened. Suddenly, I heard a husky voice. "Ah, you're awake." And as I looked to my right, I saw the man standing at the end of the hall. He slowly walked towards me as his face came into the light. I saw the most wicked smile I had ever seen on his face. Fear kicked in. "Why am I chained? Let me go!" He put his fingers to his lips and went, "Shh. It's time to eat," he said and walked into the other room, which happened to be his kitchen. "What? I'm not hungry! Let me go!" I shouted. I heard the sounds of rattling plates and spoons from the kitchen. It stopped and he walked out. He walked out with a meat knife in his hand. A chill ran down my spine as I looked at the knife, and his bland face staring at me. I started to tremble with fear. He came closer and bent towards me and said again, "It's time to eat!" And he stabbed the knife into the back of my leg. It was in this very moment I realized what he meant when he had said, "Ah, yes, food," when he had opened the door for me. He was not talking about the pizza I came to deliver. I was the food. This demon of a man was a goddamn cannibal, and I was his dinner. I burst out in tears and cried and yelled and begged for him not to kill me. He put his bloody hand against my mouth and shut me up and said, "I'm not gonna kill you. Not yet." He stabbed the knife back into the calf of my leg and began cutting. I could not do anything except sit and watch as he cut my flesh. I cried and yelled, but that did not bother him. This pain, I never felt anything like it. It was bad, and every second it got worse. As he cut into my leg, I could feel the edge of the cold metal knife touch my bone with every stroke. He cut out a fist-sized piece of the back of my leg, and then stopped. "This should be enough for now," he said. He picked up my flesh and walked into the kitchen, while I lay there bleeding out and crying in pain. I began to realize he was not going to kill me in one go. He was going to keep cutting bits of pieces out of my body for days to come, until I died. It was going to be a slow and bloody death. As I lay there crying, he returned after a few minutes with a belt and bandages. He tightened the belt around my thigh in order to prevent me from losing too much blood and wrapped the bandage around my leg. He didn't want to kill me right away. He wanted his meat to stay fresh. As he did that, I kept yelling and talking to him, asking why he was doing this to me, and begged him to let me go. He never said a word back. After he was done, he went back into the kitchen and started cooking my flesh. I could even smell it. He came out after about an hour with food on his plate. It was flesh from my leg that had just been cooked. He sat on the table and ate meat from my body right in front of me. Right in front of me. Every now and then he would look at me and give me the evilest smile while he ate. After he was done, he walked up the stairs and went to sleep as I lay there in excruciating pain. My pants were soaking wet because of all the blood on the floor. I looked around the hall, and as I began to become more aware of my surroundings, something caught my eye. It was a watch that had fallen under the chair. I recognized that watch instantly. It was Elton's watch. He didn't just go missing. He was eaten alive and murdered by the same monster. I realized I was not his first victim. He had done this before, to God knows how many poor innocent souls. That would probably explain the scars on his face. Somebody tried to escape and ended up scratching his face in the process. I started to think to myself, I need to do something. I need to find a way to escape. I knew I would barely be able to walk after he cut out flesh from my leg, but I had to try. I tugged on the rope that tied my hands to a ring in the wall. I kept pulling in an attempt to free my hands. I pulled and pulled and I felt a sudden jolt of intense pain. I had just dislocated my wrist, which only added to the already existing pain in my leg. I cried softly, and as I leant forward in disappointment, my hand slipped out of the ropes. My dislocated wrist allowed enough space between my hand and the rope to set my hands free. Although I was in pain, I had a sense of hope now. I gathered the courage and started untying the rope on my legs. I tried to stand up, but the pain was too much. I had to balance myself on one leg. I started limping around the hall as quietly as I could and started searching for my keys and phone. The dumb fool did not even hide it. It was right beside the pizza box on the table where he ate. I grabbed my keys and phone and instantly thought, Elton! I bent down and grabbed his watch. As I made my way to the door, I peeked into the kitchen, and what I saw scarred me for life. Glass jars filled with remains of human body parts. Eyes, teeth, blood. I saw pieces of rotten skin all over the kitchen counter. I nearly threw up. I took a step back in horror, and the goddamn wooden floor. Immediately, I heard footsteps coming from above me. I had woken him up. I heard him walk towards the staircase. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. I limped my way to the door as fast as I could. I opened the door and stepped out. As I looked back, I saw the cannibal. He was halfway down the stairs already. No! He yelled at me. I made my way to the car as fast as I could. I opened the door and slammed it shut behind me and locked it. As I looked to my left towards the house, he was gone. And just as I began to think I had escaped, he slammed the window to the right of my car and broke it and reached for me. I put the keys in the ignition and turned it, but the car never started. That bloody battery! I yelled. The cannibal reached for the door lock from the inside of the car and pulled it up, thereby unlocking the door. That wicked smile swept across his face again. As he stepped back to open the car door, I turned the key again and BAM! I heard the engine of my old rusty wagon roar. I hit the gas with my leg that wasn't injured and drove off abruptly. The cannibal fell to the ground with the way I drove off. I could barely see what was ahead of me. It was still dark and foggy outside, but I kept driving full speed ahead. I reached for my phone and tried to switch it on, but it was dead. I kept driving until I found the road. I went straight into town and right to the hospital. That was the first time that night I felt safe. The nurse quickly took me in as she removed the bandage on my leg. I saw the look of terror on her face as she uncovered the wounds. I was given a dose of anesthesia and knocked unconscious as the doctors needed to operate on my leg. When I woke up, it was a bright day. As I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by the doctor, Lizzie, my manager, and the cops. Lizzie smiled at me and said, "It's going to be okay." As I pushed forward in an attempt to see how my leg was doing, I felt absolutely nothing. I pulled off the blanket and started crying after what I saw. I didn't have half my leg. The doctor said that they could not save the leg and that they had to amputate it. My whole body went numb with the shock. The fact that I would never be able to walk again slowly sunk in. I gathered myself and explained to the cops what happened. They took my statement and began an investigation right away. They came back later that evening and told me that they found the mansion and all the gross body parts and saw the blood, but they couldn't find the cannibal. He was nowhere to be seen. I was left with a feeling of anger. I cried myself to sleep that night. I couldn't help but pity myself. The next morning, I woke up late to find a pizza with a note resting on top of it. I remember thinking, this must be Lizzie. She must have come in and left me a pizza after a shift. The nurse who was walking by at the moment smiled at me and said, "You had a visitor earlier today while you were asleep. He was happy to see you." I froze with fear as I thought, he? If this wasn't Lizzie, then who? I grabbed the note and it read, "Can't wait to taste you again. Get healthy soon."
Hey, yo. That was a great one. Shout out to my cousin Trayvon for sending me this video. His Instagram will be down in the description box down below. And yeah, that was a good video. I thought that show was gonna be scary as I don't know what, but that video was dope. On to the next video, baby. Let's go! Alright, so we're back with our second video. We're watching a clown horror story, and we're gonna see if this is scary or not. And I hope it's not, but it probably is, so let's get to it.
The following story is told from the point of view of a female. Back during the height of the 2016 clown craze, where psychos were dressing up and wandering around rural and wooded areas, stalking and terrifying people, I was living in a very isolated and heavily wooded property in Connecticut. My driveway was so long that my house could not be seen from the road, and I never once had a problem with trespassers, so my kids were free to play outside in our yard whenever they wished. One afternoon, I was inside the house on a conference call when my 8-year-old daughter ran into the house, stating that there was a clown in our driveway. For the first several seconds, I was annoyed, because I was convinced she was either playing a joke on me or just seeing things. I excused myself from the call and asked her what she was doing there, and she simply replied, "It's pointing at us." Something in the way she said that made a chill run through me, and I stood up and walked out of the front door and onto the front steps. My daughter pointed and I saw a figure in a pink and blue striped outfit standing by the tree line, waving and pointing towards my other 2 children who were still close to the house, but calling over to the clown, asking what it wanted. I immediately called my kids inside and locked my front door. I told them to stay put, grabbed my stun gun from its spot, and got into my car. I called my husband as I drove the car out of the garage and down the driveway, telling him what was going on, and he told me to keep the car doors locked and not to get too close. I decided, at least for the time being, not to call the police, because it would have taken them a good half an hour just to get there, and by then, the clown would likely be gone. I didn't just want to disappear into the house and wait for this person to get bored. I wanted to confront him and tell him to stay away from my property and from my kids. The clown wasn't by the tree line when I left the garage, but I drove down the driveway, into the trees a short way, and saw him jogging away at a brisk pace. When he heard my car coming, he stopped and turned around and looked back towards me. He wasn't wearing a mask, but his face was heavily made up, complete with a clown nose. But what really shook me was that he appeared to be holding a croquet mallet in one of his hands. He waved at me before disappearing into the woods, and I slammed on my brakes and rolled, screaming at him to get the hell off my property. I floored it to the end of my driveway and drove back and forth in the hopes of finding a parked car with a license plate I could report, but there wasn't anything suspicious or out of place. I returned to the house to check on my kids, who were more amused and excited than afraid. Inwardly, I kicked myself for not taking a picture of the clown on my phone, just to have a record of it in case I needed to report it. I told my kids they had to stay inside for the rest of the day and figured that I would never see the clown again. Whoever it was had gotten his kicks and certainly would not risk trespassing on my property again. The kids were asleep, and my husband and I were skimming through Netflix, and I got up to let the cat out. I'm not exactly positive on what I saw, but there was definitely something across the yard. I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and thought I saw the shadow of something cast by the moon disappearing around the corner. I turned on all the outside lights, and my husband and I looked around, but whatever it was did not reappear. It could have been a deer, I suppose, but the reason I suspect it was the clown was because of the following morning. When I drove my car to the end of the driveway, there was a purple balloon tied to our mailbox, and the little potted plant at the base of the post had been smashed, as if something big, like a mallet, had come down on it. Worried that the balloon was an indicator of some kind, I immediately untied it. The rest of that day passed without incident, and by the following afternoon, I'd forgotten all about the clown until my kids came back inside and told me he was back and pointing at them again. I yelled at the kids to come inside, but this time, instead of getting in the car, I grabbed my phone and stun gun and stupidly charged out of the front door and stomped across the yard, determined to get a picture this time, and at best stun him. I loaded them in the car and drove to my parents'. This time they were a little more spooked by the clown, and I began to become concerned that perhaps my kids were not safe in the yard anymore. I asked them if it was the same clown, and they said it was, and this time he was holding a sledgehammer. I don't know if that was true, or if they were just misidentifying the croquet mallet. The following day, I decided to become a little more proactive. My parents let me borrow their black Labrador named Groucho. He was a friendly dog, but had a tremendously loud bark, and was fiercely protective of the kids. For 2 days, nothing happened, and I was starting to hope that the clown had moved on to harass someone else. That's when it happened. I was returning back up the driveway in the car, after getting the mail, when I noticed the clown was sneaking through the woods. Groucho was in the back seat, and immediately started barking loud enough to rupture my eardrums. I slammed on my brakes and immediately called the cops and told them that there was a trespasser on my property, and he was carrying a weapon. I honestly couldn't tell if he was carrying the croquet mallet through the trees, but I know he had been carrying one before, so I felt I had a reasonable cause to assume. As I was on the phone with the cops, another call came in on my cell from the house. My oldest daughter was crying, saying that there was a clown standing on our back deck, right outside the sliding door. This one was dressed all in orange, with a blue face. I floored it back up the driveway, threw my car into park, and when I reached the garage, I saw the second clown sprinting towards the woods. I opened the rear door, and Groucho tore after the guy like a ballistic missile. He caught the clown right by the tree line, and the guy started screaming as the loyal dog leapt on top of him and tore at his costume. I distinctly heard 2 separate male voices yelling in the trees, though I couldn't make out exactly what was being said. My daughter was still on the line and confirmed to me that all the kids were still inside, so I went after my dog into the woods. When I found Groucho, he was limping slightly. I was infuriated to see that he had been stabbed with what could have been an ice pick or a screwdriver, but he ultimately seemed unbothered by it. When the cops arrived, I gave them my statement, and they searched the woods. About an hour later, I got a call saying that 2 men had been pulled over and arrested several miles away for reckless driving, and one of them had severe dog bites on both legs. Groucho went to the vet and got bandaged up, and fortunately he has been perfectly fine ever since. I never heard any follow-up pertaining to the arrest afterwards, but the whole situation still amazes me. Getting to our house through the woods isn't an easy 2-minute hike. These men had to walk a good 10 to 15 minutes through the thick forest in full clown makeup just to get close enough to see our house, all for the sake of pranking and terrorizing my family, who was just minding their own business. Their motives were completely lost on me, and the more research I did on this whole clown thing, the more I think it was some kind of test or initiation, and not just something bored people were doing to pass the time. They put real effort into stalking us, and ultimately were rewarded with a dog attack. I think they got lucky. Fortunately, I've never seen another trespasser on my property since.
Okay. That was a good one. I ain't even gonna lie. I like that one. I like that one a lot.